investors in Europe have a track record like our next guest. Co-founder of Amadeus Capital Partners, early backer of ARM, the chip architecture in the phone in your pocket you have right now. A long-standing voice for patient capital. Please welcome Hermann Hauser in conversation with Isabel.
As many people in the audience will know, likely, there is a chip inside every smartphone, laptop, and connected device on the planet. And it exists because of a rejection. It was back in the early 90s, just to take us all back before I was actually born. And there was a small British computer company called Acorn. They built the BBC Micro, the machine that taught a generation of British school children how to code. They wanted to build something more powerful, an even better processor, and they went to Intel with an ask. Your pin layout is wrong. Give us the raw silicone, and we'll fix it. Intel said, no, not interested. Who are you? Most companies would find a workaround or possibly give up. Acorn did something entirely different. They decided that if nobody would give them the right chip, they would build it themselves. So with 2 engineers, they were handed the task. Almost no budget, little team, but a clear problem and a freedom to solve it. The chip they designed used so little power that when the first prototype arrived, it ran almost entirely by the electricity that leaked through its own pins. They called it ARM, and now over 250 billion devices worldwide run on this technology. And the man who made the call, who turned Intel's rejection into an opportunity, is sitting next to me. Hermann Hauser is, of course, the co-founder of Acorn. He spun out ARM. He's the co-founder of Amadeus Capital back since 1997 and backed over 7 unicorns. He's invested in over 200 companies, often called the godfather of quantum in Europe, and spent the last decade as Europe's most forceful voices in European tech sovereignty. Hermann, welcome back to Deep Tech Momentum.
Pleasure to be back.
So Hermann, we're going to go back to this story of this turning rejection into a massive opportunity. Many founders, when faced with this kind of a closed door, will either spend a long time trying to reopen it or choose a different door. You built an entirely new one. What did this rejection with Intel teach you about where the opportunity really is? And what would you tell a founder in this room who's hitting a wall right now?
Well, I'm very happy to go back in time and tell you the story, but before I do, 3 corrections. The first correction is every one of you out there doesn't have 1 ARM chip. On average, you've got 30 ARM chips in your pocket, because apart from the main processor in your mobile phone, there is an ARM in your USB, an ARM in your Wi-Fi, an ARM in the Bluetooth, and one in the touch controller. So on average, to make the second correction, we haven't built 200, or licensed, I should say, 250 billion ARMs, but now 350 billion. So on average, every person on Earth has 40 ARMs in their pocket or in their PC. And the third correction is, you said I was involved in 7 unicorns. Well, that has increased to 12 by now, so we're a bit out of date. So back to the Intel story. It was a very interesting moment in time when the 8-bit processor ran out of speed. So we, on the BBC Micro, we used the 6502, which was the same chip that was in the Apple II. And we needed one that was more powerful. And the Intel chip at the time, the 8286, would have done the job. But it had the wrong pinout for our architecture. So we went to ask them if they would change the pinout. They, of course, said, who the hell are you? Get lost. I was the Steve Jobs of the UK at the time. We were riding high. We were the first company in Europe, I think, maybe at the time, to go from 0 to not a value of 100 million, but a revenue of 100 million. So, we were riding high. So we said to Intel, well, you get lost, we'll do our own. And then to come on to why could a company like Acorn do that, there was actually a breakthrough in the US called RISC, for Reduced Instruction Set Computers. which was a breakthrough at Stanford and Berkeley. And ARM is a European outlier in many respects. And one respect is that the basic technology breakthrough was actually made in the US, but the commercialization of that breakthrough was first done in Europe. We were the first implementation of that RISC machine. And because it was the reduced instruction set computer, we could design this project with just two people, Roger Wilson, Sophie Wilson, and Steve Ferber. So it's the only microprocessor in the world that was not designed by a group of 50 people, but by a group of two people. So sometimes less is more.
And what a time now, you know, this was many, many years ago before we had the kind of capability of what AI can do now. When you think about the principles of building a world-class team of two people who could do the power of 50, has that principle evolved or changed now in a time where it's even more so the case that a few excellent people can do so much more than ever before?
Well, this is the time of hyperbole and fantastic predictions, and some of you might have heard Sam Altman talking about a single person producing $1 trillion company by having a vast army of AI helpers. I think it's a bit of an exaggeration, but there is the fact that AI can help you a lot, making a team more efficient, as we see with our software groups.
Yeah. And what's very interesting to me as well about the ARM story is you had a relatively unusual business model, certainly at the time, which was you don't manufacture the chips, but you license the design, earn a royalty on every chip shipped by somebody else. It's now, of course, one of the most valuable IP businesses in history, but required an enormous conviction to resist the temptation to vertically integrate. Earlier this morning, we had Josef from Isar Aerospace. They spend a lot of time now, de-risking their operations by vertically integrating. For a founder building within a certain value chain, under what conditions would you say it makes sense to vertically integrate versus take the path you successfully took?
Yes, this is an issue that is often underestimated by people, that sometimes you create as much value with the judicious choice of the business model as you do with the technology itself. And of course, ARM is a good example. So you rightly say, what are the criteria to make that decision on whether you want to do licensing or whether you want to vertically integrate? And my view is that the key criteria is whether you can define two clear interfaces. One is the interface at the bottom with respect to your suppliers, and the other is the interface at the top with respect to your customers. If you can clearly articulate those two interfaces, then you have a right to exist. How far these two interfaces are apart and over what range of the stack you want to optimize is one of those clever optimizations that you have to do as an entrepreneur when you choose your business model. But choosing it cleverly can create a lot of value.
Very, very interesting. Massively helpful. Okay, you, of course, beyond this initial very successful founder journey, you've built an institution investment fund with Amadeus. You've backed over 200 companies. Is that also an expired?
No, I think it's 250 now, but that's close
250,
enough.
okay, closer than 7 versus 12 unicorns. Yeah. You have a very famous line that says an A-grade team with C-grade technology beats a C-grade team with A-grade technology every time. For the investors in the room, when you are in a first meeting with founders, what are some of the green flags that tell you, I'm in the presence of an A-grade team?
Yes, this is not easy, because people who tell you that they're five-star wizards often aren't five-star wizards. So the best way of assessing whether somebody really is the outstanding person that we always look for in a team, because if you have a world-class leader, either on the technology side or sometimes also on a management side, a CEO that has done it before, the best way of assessing the quality of these people is to look at what the network says about them. People normally are known in the industry for what they have done and the respect they have from their colleagues. And that is a good measure of their actual importance and capabilities rather than listening to what they tell you.
Yes, I can imagine this one. They often say that these kind of, let's say, A players hire A players, B players hire C players.
I think that's right.
When it comes to, let's say, there are founders in the room who are A players, what would you tell them is the single most common mistake that founders make when attempting to hire other A players within their team? So errors to avoid from a founder perspective when hiring their early team.
Well, if you look at the technical teams, sadly, normally, of course, the number one criterion is the technical competence of the person. And clearly, you want people who are very technically competent. But, in a startup, in a team, that's not the only selection criterion. It also must be their ability to work with other people and share their brilliance and translate that brilliance into something that other people can actually make into a successful commercial product. So it's the EQT as well as the IQT that's important.
And I'm wondering, time is so limited. I am a founder. I've, just raised my seed round. I'm building a photonics company, and I have 50 interviews over the course of 2 weeks, and I have a 45-minute session with the top candidates. What questions or what kind of paths can I go down in a short period of time to discover someone who has the kind of EQT to build a category-defining company beyond the technical expertise?
Well, having listened to one or two presentations before helps you sort of get a bit of a pattern recognition of how people present themselves, whether they're just full of themselves with not a lot of technical expertise to back them up. Or sometimes they're full of themselves and they have every reason to be full of themselves because they are brilliant. So, you have to accept the personality quirks if they really are outstanding. So it's just a pattern recognition that appears after a while when you've met lots of them.
Volume, fair. Okay, looking now future-facing. Let's say we're rewinding time and you are finishing your PhD in Cavendish Lab tomorrow and starting a company on Monday. Which 3 technologies would you build around, or which would you completely avoid?
Well, it's clear that AI is going to play a continued role for some time to come. And those of you that might not have read the recent Nature paper on the AI scientist, which I found was one of those iconic papers that might herald the things to come. So the AI scientist in that paper was a program where you asked the program in a voice interface to find an interesting problem, scientific problem to solve, go solve it, then write the paper in the style that you can submit it to a conference, and then get it submitted and get it to the conference. It was an AI problem because they're easier to assess, and the paper was submitted. It wasn't accepted by the mainstream conference, but it was accepted in the workshop. But the fact that there was an AI program that could do the problem solving end to end, including the articulation of an interesting problem, I thought was one of those iconic moments in AI where you outsourced the lot.
And anywhere, in an area or technological field where you have this very unique perspective where you've seen a very large window of time, something where you say, this wave has come and gone, the window is closed, it's too late to build there?
No, let me tell you the positive one, which is, I'm a perennial optimist. The one that I'm particularly keen on is synthetic biology. So, I think I spend a lot of my time in quantum computing. I've made 7 investments in quantum computer companies. But I think probably the most important application of quantum computers long term is going to fulfill a Richard Feynman a problem, where Richard Feynman says, why on earth would you ever want to use a classical computer to simulate a quantum system? You need to use a quantum computer to simulate a quantum system. Now, why is simulating quantum systems so important? Well, basically molecules are quantum systems, and the way that, say, proteins interact with small molecules in a pharma environment, this is all basically a quantum mechanical problem. So the long-term vision of maybe having drug trials in silico rather than in people to speed up the way of finding new medicines is maybe the most exciting new development that combines AI, quantum computing, and our very detailed knowledge that we now have of biology. The reason why I'm so excited about synthetic biology, more so long-term than quantum computing or AI, is that for the first time, also another Richard Feynman quote, it was, I cannot understand what I cannot build. And for the first time in history, we now can build biology. So the detailed understanding of biology, including building new cells and new living things, will now be possible. And I just find that very exciting and very relevant for the future of our own health and the health system.
Maybe we make a bit of a transition now. As you're possibly very aware, Deep Tech Momentum, we built this entire company with a very strong North Star in mind, which is we want to drive European technical sovereignty, which I know is a mission very close to your heart. You've worked extensively and spoken extensively about technological sovereignty and this idea that depending on foreign technologies is the modern equivalent of military dependence. We now have a lot of different initiatives and activities to bridge this gap and to bolster this European renaissance. Most recently, of course, the recent Scale-Up Fund, multi-billion fund that has been recently announced. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your role here, as well as what you think this will do for Europe in the best case scenario.
Yes, I'm actually writing a book on technology sovereignty at the moment. And I never thought that this would be such an issue, but in many ways, the best thing that could have happened to Europe is Trump and Putin. We've been attacked from the West and the East, and finally we understand that nobody will help us anymore, so we've got to stand on our own 2 feet. We've got to have our own capability. If you look at the components that are still missing in Europe, it is not our university system. Our university system has an IP output which is comparable to the US. We also don't have a problem at the startup level. We actually produce more startups than the US. But we then fail miserably at the scale-up stage. So out of the, if you look at the number of hectacorns, as they're called now, companies that are worth more than 100 billion euros, there are only 5 of them in Europe, including ARM now at 200 billion. But there are 35 in the US. So there's a huge discrepancy. Also, if you look at the famous slide from KPMG about the GDP development of the US versus Europe, you see that the GDP per person tracked the European GDP growth and the American GDP growth tracked each other until about 10 years ago. So it was a surprisingly long period where we kept pace with the US. And then this big gap appeared, starting about 10 years ago. And that entire gap is tech. So it is really technology where we fall behind. So having a scale-up fund that allows us to build substantial world-class company in Europe and leave them in Europe, I think is the next big challenge. Out of my 12 unicorns that I've been involved in, every single one of them ended up in the US. Only 8 of those were European unicorns, but those 8 we should have kept in Europe, and this, I think, will help with that.
Just to even double down on this question, you already mentioned ARM is a perfect illustration of this. This is a British-born European company, sold to SoftBank, almost sold to NVIDIA, now listed on NASDAQ, and you've publicly fought against several of those outcomes. When you look back, beyond even the scale-up fund and growth capital, what does the ARM story tell us about what the structural changes Europe needs to stop losing the best companies exactly in the moment that they become globally significant?
So let me give an answer. Not myself, but Julia Hoggart. Julia Hoggart is the chief executive officer of the London Stock Exchange. She said we made 3 mistakes with ARM. The first mistake was to sell it to SoftBank for 32 billion. The second mistake, when it came back on the market, when Masa-san decided to go public again at a $50 billion valuation, ARM was always listed on the London Stock Exchange and on NASDAQ. So the second mistake was that we failed to get an ARM listing in Europe again, simply because the European Stock Exchange wasn't liquid enough to have enough money to have an IPO of a company that's worth 50 billion, which led to the third mistake. So the third mistake was a majority of the investment in ARM before it was bought by SoftBank was with London funds and European funds. So ARM went back to these funds that made lots of money with ARM when it was sold to SoftBank and said, are you going to invest in ARM at a $50 billion valuation? And they all came back and said, hey, $50 billion, you're terribly overvalued. Which European companies has ever grown substantially above $50 billion? So, euros. Thereby missing out on the biggest creation of wealth in Europe ever over a 2 or 3 year period, because it went from 50 billion to 200 billion. So they left a 4x return over a 3 year period on the table just because they did not understand the importance of CPUs in the value of AI, whereas the American investors, of course, had the analyst cover and the analyst understanding to invest in ARM at that valuation. So there are 3 things that we've got to fix. I think the scale-up fund, which starts at 50 billion, and we just made the announcement. So I'm on the European Innovation Council Fund, and we made a decision 2 days ago to appoint EQT as our manager for the Scale-up Europe Fund. So that's the 5 billion. But it will not stop at the 5 billion. Ursula von der Leyen, when we had dinner with her, is absolutely determined to make that 20 billion. And the long-term ambition is to make it a 100 billion fund, because the whole in Europe is actually 200 billion. So we need 200 billion to support our quality technology companies to become global winners. But 5 billion is a start, and we will be able to put these rounds together that are 100 billion to maybe a billion occasionally. And I was delighted to see that Jan LeCun has managed to get $1 billion for his startup, Amy, that will be a Paris-based startup, and a Cambridge company called Waze managed to get $1 billion. So occasionally, we can get these $1 billion rounds together in Europe as well. So one is having enough money for them, but the second one is also to have a pan-European stock exchange that is a credible alternative to NASDAQ.
Yeah.
And that's a problem still to be solved.
Okay, folks, I'm going to ask Herman one more question, and then you will have this amazing opportunity to ask a legend of the European deep tech ecosystem, probably only 1 or 2 questions, so have a little think if you have one in mind. Herman, you have been building and backing European deep tech for nearly 50 years. Is that the right number?
50.
50, we'll call it 50. We'll stick with 50. The ARM chip nobody believed in, the gene sequencing technology nobody thought could be so cheap, the sovereign argument that dismissed as too ambitious by many. You have a good track record of being right before many are ready to listen. Is there something today that you have high conviction in that many people don't yet believe you? And what is it?
Well, I have never seen a better time to start a company in technology than now, because there's never been a coincidence of very dramatic breakthroughs in AI, in quantum computing, in synthetic biology, all at the same time. But let me just give you one example on quantum computing, because I don't think all of you follow the quantum computing space. There is a concept called Q-Day for Quantum Day, when, without a shadow of a doubt, quantum computing will be talked about in the same day as, in the same way that you had the ChatGPT moment where everybody started talking about AI. So what does Q-Day mean? Well, Q-Day is the day that quantum computers can crack Shor's algorithm, which is the RSA 2048 encryption standard that we all use for all the encrypted information, the bank transfers, the WhatsApp end-to-end encryption, etc. Now, the reason why this is such a fundamental event is because it is such a clearly defined problem that all the quantum computer industry knows about, so that you can do a detailed calculation for what, this is called QRE, for quantum resource estimation, for when this will happen. So every year, the top quantum scientists in the world are being asked, when do you think we will have Q-Day? And for many, many years, the answer was around 2035. 2 weeks ago, 2 papers, one from Google and one from Euratom, showed that this might be as early as 2026. So, rather than something that we all thought was 9 years away, has come in dramatically to be as little as 3 years away. I have never seen a contraction of a technology rollout that has been faster than that. So my expectation is that we're seeing a lot of excitement and more money going into quantum computing in the past. So watch this space.
Amazing answer. Okay, folks, as promised, there are a handful, well, maybe 1 or 2 questions that would be possible. So if you have a question for the amazing Mr. Hauser, please raise your hand and we will distribute a couple of microphones. Please, here up at the front. Do we have a microphone up here? Super.
Thank you both so much. Erman, I had a question about this concept of New Palo Alto that gets talked about a lot. Sometimes people talk about it as between a collection of European states, of ecosystems within Europe, and some people even talk about it between London, Cambridge, and Oxford. And I wondered if you could share any thoughts about what you think about that and if that is a realistic destination.
Yes, I think it is a real destination. The way I normally speak about this, because we always beat ourselves up. We compare ourselves with Silicon Valley, and of course we're not Silicon Valley yet, and people despair because Silicon Valley is still so far ahead. So if Silicon Valley is there, the UK is here, Europe is here, and my native Austria is down there. We used to have a very steep gradient between all these different ecosystems. The order is still the same, but the gradient has become a lot shallower. So, some of the UK environments, be it the Golden Triangle or London in AI or Cambridge in deep tech, is snapping at Silicon Valley's heel, and ARM is as important a company as, in fact, arguably more important than Intel. So in microprocessors, you know, we got there. Europe is snapping on UK's heel. You know, TUM is producing 100 startups a year at the moment. That's very impressive. And even Austria now has 3 unicorns. So if you can do it in Austria, you can do it anywhere. You know?
We would have time for one more question from Philip.
Since you were speaker of TUM, I wanted to follow up on the relationship between quantum computing and AI. Because clearly, you know, we talk a lot about quantum computing and lots of, you know, always with this kind of, you know, exploding complexity, et cetera, and brute force arguments, and AI has solved lots of them very efficiently, differently. However, I was still shocked. I read Demis Hassabis in this Nobel Prize talk claimed any pattern that can be generated or found in nature can be efficiently discovered and modeled by a classical learning algorithm. Obviously, to a physicist, that seems completely absurd, right? I mean, any views on your end about that? Thank you.
Yes, he's wrong. So I have a bet with him. And the bet is he thinks he will make a major contribution. As you know, he's got this startup called Isomorphic Lab, where he does a lot of research in molecules binding onto proteins and even protein-protein interaction, which is one of the key problems. And you know, as a physicist, my view was, in order to really understand this, you've got to do it quantum mechanically, and therefore quantum computing is the right way to go. So first, let me make two more points. One is, I said, Demis, you just made a statement which I think was underreported. He made a statement about half a year ago that within 10 years he will solve all diseases. And I thought that was an outrageous statement and didn't get the headlines that I would expect it. Either saying Demis has finally gone bonkers and he's thinking that he can solve all the diseases in the world, or Demis is the greatest genius that ever walked on this earth, finally solving all our disease problems. But neither headline appeared, to my surprise. So I said, Demis, you know, have you gone bonkers, or do you really believe this? And he says, yes, Herman, I really believe this. And the reason why I believe this is because that's exactly what happened with protein folding. When once we managed to solve a few proteins well, within months we then solved all of them. So if we find an AI solution to understand how particular pathways work on a particular disease, and we then have a model, we can then extrapolate it or apply it to all diseases. And I believe that to be true. And you know, the fact that he managed to get a Nobel Prize for doing it for proteins is a credible stepping stone. However, where he is wrong is that just the mathematics of quantum computing show that the problems that you can solve with quantum computers are in a different complexity class from the ones in a classical computing. So clearly, quantum computers can solve problems that no classical computer will ever be able to solve. And one of the algorithms, one of the most famous algorithm, of course, is Shor's algorithm, but one of the other algorithms does apply to AI as well. So that's why I think he's just wrong.
Unfortunately, we are already over time. So this has been an absolutely content-packed session. For those who have somewhat arrived towards the end, I will try my absolute best to wrap up in 3 points, some takeaways from this session. One, for the founders in the room, under what criteria to vertically integrate? Herman mentioned the distance between the suppliers at the top of your value chain all the way down to your customers, the space between them and your ability to articulate this space. This is your right to exist and determine that question of vertical integration. 2, for the investors in the room, identifying the AAA teams. Possibly don't listen to what they say about themselves, but rather look to what others say about them and reputable sources. And finally, to everyone in the room who cares about European technical sovereignty, there has never been a better time to build than now. The rate at which breakthroughs happen at the intersection of markets that matter most has never been higher. So Herman, you are a beacon of hope to the next generation of founders, investors, and builders across Europe. I think from everyone in the room and the entire European ecosystem, we owe you. You've fundamentally changed the landscape for many. So a huge, huge thank you for joining us on stage and coming back to Deep Tech Momentum again and again. It's a massive pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.